Welcome to the adventure of the Lille Saboteur, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Consulting Detective's War. Holmes in WWI, playing in the year 1916. It is with a sense of profound duty, and indeed some measure of astonishment, that I find myself able to present these accounts. For many years, the true nature of Mr. Sherlock Holmes's service during the Great War remained shrouded by the gravest matters of state security, the details locked away within the War Office archives. Only now, with the passage of considerable time, can these records be brought forth, revealing his clandestine work between 1914 and 1918. These were not matters for the public prince then, for Holmes was engaged in a desperate shadow war, applying his singular genius to espionage and counter-espionage, far from the trenches, where information itself was the most potent weapon. This collection, then, forms a part of what might be termed the Consulting Detective's War. Holmes in WWI. Allow me now to draw your attention to a particular engagement from those perilous times, an affair which tested even Holmes's remarkable abilities. I shall recount for you the adventure of the Lille Saboteur. Chapter 1. The autumn of that year found us back in London. As we settled into the familiar confines of 221B Baker Street, the grim tidings of war seemed to press against our windows, turning our rooms into a somber sanctuary from the anxieties that gripped the nation. A chill wind whistled and rattled at our window panes. It carried the distant, mournful cry of a newsboy hawking the latest bulletins from the front. I attempted to absorb myself in a medical journal. However, the sharp crackle of the fire in the grate and the steady, rhythmic tick-tock of the mantelpiece clock did little to soothe the unease permeating the very air we breathed. Holmes, however, seemed impervious. He paced before the fireplace, his footsteps a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the clock, a coiled spring of restless energy. His brow was furrowed in thought. Suddenly, the sharp, insistent summons of our doorbell cut through the quiet hum of the afternoon. Moments later, Mrs. Hudson entered, her footsteps gentle on the rug. She bore a small, rather crumpled envelope upon a silver salver. The scent of foreign tobacco, faint but distinct, clung to it. He paused in his scrutiny of the missive. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, charged with a sudden gravity. From France, Watson, and delivered with considerable haste, if the state of this envelope is any indication. Observe the watermark, a fleur-de-lis, almost obscured by a thumbprint of what appears to be coal dust. And this particular fold, yes, it is as I suspected, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He unfolded the single sheet of thin paper. The crisp sound of its unfolding was distinct in the quiet room. His eyes scanned the contents with unnerving speed. The message was brief, a series of seemingly innocuous phrases. Yet I saw his expression harden, the lines around his keen eyes deepening. For a long minute, the only sound was the faint, dry rustle of that paper in his hand. "Bad news, Holmes," I ventured, my journal quite forgotten. Asked Dr. John Watson. He looked up, his gaze distant. "It is from Mademoiselle Dubois, our Nightingale in Lille. She speaks of a shadow falling over the city, a saboteur whose methods are unorthodox, even for these desperate times. She implies a ruthlessness that chills the blood. This individual targets not only military installations, but also civilian resources. Such a tactic serves little purpose, but to incite terror and reprisal. It has the stench of a provocation, Watson," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Before I could fully digest the implications, a second messenger arrived. This one was an official-looking, uniformed corporal. His boots struck a sharp, decisive rhythm on our stairs, announcing his approach. He delivered a sealed dispatch. Holmes tore it open with a sharp rip of paper, his air one of grim expectation. It contained a curt summons to the War Office. Within the hour, we were seated in a Spartan office. The air was thick with the scent of official documents and stale cigar smoke. From somewhere nearby came the muted, rhythmic clatter of a typewriter. Major Alastair Finch rose to greet us. His face bore the indelible stamp of sleepless nights and grave responsibilities. His voice, when he spoke, was clipped, devoid of pleasantries, each word precise. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for your promptness. The situation in Lille is deteriorating rapidly. This saboteur, he or she, is remarkably effective. Our intelligence suggests key textile mills, vital for uniform production, are being crippled. Certain engineering workshops, potentially capable of manufacturing munitions components for the resistance, are also being systematically targeted. The attacks are brutal, indiscriminate. This is causing chaos, and worse, suspicion within the resistance itself." Major Alastair Finch answered. The Major spread a map of Lille across his desk with a soft rustle of stiff paper. His finger tapped decisively as it traced routes and highlighted industrial zones. The very names, Waisums, Fives, suddenly seemed laden with peril. "Your task, Mr. Holmes, should you accept it, is this: infiltrate Lille, identify the saboteur, ascertain their true allegiance," replied Major Alastair Finch. Major Finch paused, his eyes narrowing. "Is it a patriot gone rogue? A German ploy, we must know." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "It is, I need hardly state, an assignment of the utmost danger and delicacy," Major Alastair Finch said. Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with that familiar light of intellectual challenge. "Understood, Major. We shall require certain resources for our journey into occupied territory," Sherlock Holmes responded. Back in the familiar clutter of Baker Street, the true weight of our undertaking began to settle upon me. Holmes was already at work. I heard the rustle of maps being unfurled and the soft clink of items as he pulled various articles of disguise from his voluminous collection. His movements were precise and economical. The evening air, seeping in through the slightly open window, felt colder now. It carried not just the muffled sounds of London, a distant carriage, a closing door, but also the imagined echo of distant hostilities. "Watson, you will need your sturdiest boots and a capacity for observing without being observed. We depart before dawn. The Nightingale awaits, and darkness, it seems, has many agents," Sherlock Holmes noted. I watched him, a silhouette against the faint hiss and glow of the gaslight. A familiar mixture of apprehension and admiration filled me. To venture into the heart of enemy-held France was a daunting prospect. To enter a city teeming with German soldiers, rife with hidden dangers, could daunt the stoutest heart. Yet, where Holmes led, I knew I must follow, into whatever peril awaited us in the shadowed streets of Lille. The pre-dawn chill bit at my face as our small fishing vessel nudged the French coast. Baker Street felt a world away. Grim occupied territory loomed. Holmes, disguised as Mynheer van der Velde, a Dutch merchant, surveyed the desolate shore. I, his associate Mynheer Grotius, clutched a valise with contents far from typical business samples. The waves washed mournfully against the hull, a prelude, I feared, to darker melodies. Our crossing, though uneventful, was fraught with tension. The true test began as a muddy track led inland. Soon, guttural German shouts reached us. Ahead, a makeshift checkpoint, two gray-uniformed soldiers, rifles glinting in the dim light. His voice was rough, suspicious. "Halt, papier, your papers. Now," German border guard said. Holmes stepped forward, his demeanor one of mild impatience rather than fear. He produced our forged documents with a flourish. "Guten Morgen," observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes spoke, his German flawless, his tone disarmingly placid. "We are traders from Amsterdam, here on legitimate business, as you can see," stated Sherlock Holmes. The guard scrutinized the papers, his gaze flicking between them and our faces. Silence stretched, broken only by a distant crow and the rustle of papers. His companion watched, unblinking, finger near his trigger. Finally, with a curt nod, The guard returned our papers. Proceed, keep to the designated routes. We have eyes everywhere. Do not stray. Verstanden, German border guard said. We walked on, the sensation of their eyes boring into our backs acute. Only when we were well out of earshot did Holmes speak, his voice low. Their scrutiny was perfunctory, Watson. They look for fear, for hesitation. Our Mynheer Grotius showed a commendable degree of Dutch stolidity, I must say, Sherlock Holmes noted. His praise did little to calm my hands. Lille streets, when we finally reached them, were a grim tableau. German flags hung limply, a stark reminder of occupation. The city's usual bustle was replaced by a hushed, wary quiet. Jackboots echoed on cobblestones. Citizens hurried past, eyes downcast. Following Major Finch's intricate instructions, we navigated alleyways to an unassuming bakery. Our specific sequence of knocks, two sharp, one soft, then two more sharp, was met by the sound of bolts being drawn. The door creaked open a fraction, revealing a sliver of a woman's face. Her voice was a mere whisper, strained but clear. The early bird seeks the worm, Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, answered. But the nightingale sings sweetest at dusk, Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes replied, completing the countersign. The door opened fully. Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois ushered us into a cramped, dimly lit room at the rear of the shop. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of stale bread and palpable anxiety. She was younger than I'd pictured, pale, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. Messieurs, thank you for coming. The situation is desperate, remarked Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. Her voice trembled slightly as she gestured for us to sit on rough wooden crates. She wasted no time, her words tumbling out in a torrent of carefully controlled urgency. The saboteur, they call him, Le Corbeau, the raven he strikes without warning, with a brutality that chills the blood. Last week, a supply train derailed. Expected. But then, the local patisserie, frequented by German officers but also by our own people, a bomb. 3 civilians died, including a child. I saw Holmes lean forward, his expression intent, his fingers steepled. Civilian targets, mademoiselle. This is unusual for a patriot. It serves little strategic purpose and alienates the populace. Tell me more about these incidents. Are there patterns, specific types of civilian targets, or is it indiscriminate? Sherlock Holmes said. That is what is so terrifying, Monsieur Holmes. There seems no logic. A military fuel depot one day, a small cafe the next. The Germans are using it, of course, to paint the entire resistance as monsters. Some whisper Le Corbeau is a provocateur, a German agent himself, said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze distant as if piecing together fragments unseen by us. A provocateur would indeed seek to discredit your cause through such means. However, the targeting of a fuel depot alongside a patisserie, it suggests either a fractured mind or a very particular, if twisted, strategy. We must understand the mind behind these acts. You mentioned a recent incident, Sherlock Holmes responded. Yes, 2 nights ago. An explosion near the field hospital on the Rue de la Victoire. Not a direct hit on the hospital itself, but close enough to cause panic and disrupt their operations. Some say Le Corbeau was targeting German wounded being treated there. Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, said. Holmes's eyes lit. The mention of a field hospital, a place of supposed neutrality despite occupation, resonated with his investigative instincts. The air in the small room grew heavy with unspoken possibilities. Here, then, was our next thread. Following Mademoiselle Dubois' disquieting account, Holmes determined our next port of call to be the Hospital Sainte Marie, a field hospital under German command. The air grew heavier with the scent of carbolic acid and despair as we approached. The rhythmic crunch of a sentry's boots on gravel before the entrance was a stark reminder of the occupying force. Inside, a grim symphony of suffering met our ears. Low moans from behind screened-off carts, the hurried rustle of nurses' aprons, and the occasional sharp clang of metal instruments. Holmes, ever observant, seemed to absorb the very essence of the place. He paused by a supply ledger on a desk, his attention fixed upon it for a moment longer than seemed natural. Note the entries, Watson. Bandages, morphine, quinine, all meticulously accounted for, or so it would appear. Yet the quantities requisitioned seem excessive, even for an establishment of this size and grim purpose, explained Sherlock Holmes. We were directed to the chief surgeon, Dr. Anton Morrow. He met us in a small, cluttered office, the muted sounds of the ward filtering through the thin door. He was a man of perhaps 50 years. Fatigue was etched into his voice as much as his face, and his tone carried a weary sorrow he struggled to conceal beneath professional detachment. His shoulders were stooped, the weight of his burden evident in every movement. "Gentlemen, you are the Dutch inspectors, I presume. I received word. How may I assist you?" said Dr. Anton Morrow. "Indeed, doctor," Holmes replied, his tone blandly official. "We are merely reviewing resource allocation. Your hospital appears strained," Sherlock Holmes responded. Morrow hesitated, his gaze briefly shifting towards a stack of paperwork before returning to Holmes. A subtle tension in his jaw betrayed an inner turmoil. I sensed the profound conflict within him, the healer forced to serve the conqueror, his oath stretched taut. I also noted an incongruous detail. His hands, though clearly a surgeon's, bore faint stains of what appeared to be dark machinery grease beneath the iodine. He gave a sigh that seemed to carry the exhaustion of all Lille. "Strained is an understatement, monsieur. We do what we can with what we are given. The demands are constant," remarked Dr. Anton Morrow. Holmes nodded, his attention fixed intently on the doctor. "And your losses of supplies, pilferage perhaps. One hears stories in these troubled times," Sherlock Holmes said. A perceptible tension filled the small office. Dr. Morrow's voice, when he next spoke, lost some of its weariness, replaced by a guarded caution. "We take every precaution, monsieur," he stated, his voice now firmer, though still betraying an underlying stress. "But war is a chaotic business," remarked Dr. Anton Morrow. Later, whilst ostensibly examining the hospital's dispensary, the occasional sigh of a bored German orderly nearby reminding us of our scrutiny. Holmes subtly drew my attention to a loose floorboard beneath a shelving unit. A faint scrape, barely audible, and he had prized it up. Beneath, nestled in the cavity, were several neatly wrapped parcels, bandages, sutures, and small vials of morphine, clearly not part of the official German inventory. He replaced the boards swiftly. "Excessive requisitions, Watson," he murmured, his voice thoughtful and barely audible above the distant clatter of a bedpan. "And now, a hidden cache. Our good doctor walks a precarious line, it would seem. These are not for the German wounded," Sherlock Holmes responded. As we prepared to depart, a low, guttural exclamation from Holmes arrested my attention. He was near a rear wall of the hospital, his fingers tracing a section where the brickwork was freshly scarred and blackened. The unmistakable acrid scent of burnt powder, faint but discernible, still clung to the air. "Notice, Watson," he said, his voice sharp with interest. "The earth here is freshly disturbed. A small, precisely placed charge. Ineffective, perhaps intended more as a message or a diversion, but recent, very recent. The saboteur's calling card, I fancy, and perilously close to these walls. The implications were clear. The hospital, already a crucible of suffering and moral compromise, was now directly touched by the shadow of this elusive destroyer. And Dr. Morrow, with his hidden supplies and the profound weariness in his voice, was surely entangled in this web. Holmes fell silent for a moment, his mind clearly already piecing together the next move. Our Nightingale spoke of channels, Watson, conduits through which aid and information flow. I suspect Dr. Moreau is more than just a surgeon. We must find the source of these supplies and the network that distributes them. It is there, I believe, we shall come closer to our saboteur, and perhaps to the truth of his devastating campaign. Following Mademoiselle Dubois, whom we knew as Nightingale, Holmes and I found ourselves plunged into a darkness more profound than any London fog. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and something acrid I could not quite place, seemed to press in upon us. Our guide, a silhouette against the faintest glimmer of a shielded lantern she carried, moved with a familiarity that bespoke long acquaintance with these subterranean passages. The faint scrape of her shoes on the rough-hewn floor was often the only sound, save for the distant, mournful drip of water somewhere in the oppressive blackness. Tread carefully, messieurs. The ground is uneven and sound carries strangely here. These tunnels were old smugglers' routes expanded by necessity, said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. Holmes, ever alert, made no verbal reply. Yet in the darkness, I could almost feel his heightened attention, every faculty engaged in absorbing the details of our clandestine route. The passage twisted and turned, at times so low we were forced to stoop, the rough walls brushing against our coats. I confess, a certain claustrophobia began to assail me, a feeling of being buried alive deep beneath the troubled streets of Lille. After what seemed an age, a faint yellow light appeared ahead. The murmur of hushed voices reached our ears, a welcome, if unsettling, change from the tomb-like silence. Nightingale paused at a crudely fashioned door, a mere plank set into the earth. She rapped a series of soft, rhythmic knocks. A grating sound answered as a bolt was drawn. We entered a wider chamber, a cavern almost, its ceiling shored up with heavy timbers. Several figures turned as we entered, their faces indistinct in the flickering lamplight. One man, however, stepped forward, commanding attention. He was tall, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that burned with a fierce intensity. "Nightingale, you bring guests. Are they reliable?" Marcel Lefebvre said. "They are friends, Marcel," she replied, her tone firm despite the man's challenging gaze. "Sent to aid our cause," responded Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. This, then, was Marcel Lefebvre, the charismatic leader whose methods had caused such disquiet. Holmes observed him with that penetrating gaze of his, a gaze that seemed to strip away all artifice. I noted a palpable tension in the air. While some of the resistance members regarded Lefebvre with fervent admiration, their faces alight with a similar zeal, others shifted uneasily. Their eyes darted not only between Lefebvre and Holmes, but also towards Nightingale, as if seeking her silent counsel or reassurance. One older man, his face etched with the grim lines of prolonged hardship and worry, caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head when Lefebvre's back was momentarily turned. It was clear that Lefebvre's fiery brand of leadership, while perhaps inspiring to the younger, more impetuous members, was a source of considerable apprehension for those who favored caution and a more measured approach to their perilous work. Nightingale herself, I observed, maintained a composed exterior, yet there was a tightness around her lips that suggested an ongoing effort to bridge these internal divides, a silent testament to the differing philosophies at play within this very chamber. "Monsieur Lefebvre, I presume, we have heard of your direct actions against the occupiers," Sherlock Holmes noted. "Direct action is the only language they understand, monsieur," Lefebvre retorted, his voice hardening. "We strike where it hurts them most. No target is too sacred if it weakens their grip," Marcel Lefebvre answered. A murmur ran through the assembled group at Lefebvre's words. Some nodded in vigorous agreement, their expressions hardening with conviction, while the older man I had noticed earlier visibly flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor. Another, a young woman with haunted eyes, standing near a stack of medical supplies, looked down at her hands, her knuckles white, as if gripping an unseen burden. Lefebvre's words, delivered with such conviction, nonetheless sent a chill down my spine. As he spoke, gesturing towards a shadowed alcove, my eyes, and more keenly Holmes's, were drawn to a stack of wooden crates. From one crate, slightly ajar, protruded the unmistakable cylindrical shape of dynamite sticks, bundled together with wire. The sheer quantity was alarming. "A considerable arsenal, Monsieur Lefebvre," Holmes observed, his tone neutral, yet I detected a note of profound consideration. "Such resources suggest a bold strategy. Tell me, are your suppliers as indiscriminate as your targets?" replied Sherlock Holmes. Lefebvre's eyes narrowed. "We take what we need from wherever we can. The fight for France demands no less," Marcel Lefebvre answered. Lefebvre seemed about to elaborate, perhaps with less discretion than advisable, his voice rising in pitch, but Nightingale intervened smoothly, placing a calming hand on his arm. "Marcel is passionate, messieurs. We all are in our devotion to France," she stated, her voice, though quiet, carrying authority. "Unity in our ultimate goal is paramount, even if our preferred paths sometimes diverge. Our resources are pooled for the greater good, though discussions on their most effective application are, shall we say, vigorous and ongoing." Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, replied. Her words, diplomatic yet pointed, seemed to momentarily diffuse the sharpness in Lefebvre's stance, though his eyes still smoldered with conviction. It was a masterful display of navigating the turbulent currents within their own ranks, a clear indication that Nightingale represented a more unifying, perhaps more strategic, influence than the volatile Lefebvre. The discussion continued. Lefebvre outlined his philosophies of resistance, his voice ringing with patriotic fervor. Holmes listened intently, interjecting with pointed questions that seemed to probe for inconsistencies, for the true nature of the man beneath the zealot's exterior. I sensed a growing unease in my friend, a disquiet that mirrored my own. The line between patriot and fanatic seemed perilously thin in this subterranean world. "The explosives, Watson. Note the primers. They are of a somewhat crude, almost improvised manufacture, yet the dynamite itself is of a consistent military grade. A curious dichotomy, suggesting a desperate assembly but a well-supplied source," Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes's words hung in the damp air. The implications were unsettling. Before us lay evidence of a dangerous capability, wielded by a man whose passion seemed to override all caution. As we followed Nightingale back towards the labyrinthine exit, Holmes was unusually pensive. The echoes in these tunnels were not merely of sound, but of troubling ideologies and the grim necessities of war. I knew then that his next move would involve understanding not just the resistance, but also the nature of the enemy they fought, and perhaps the enemy within. The discovery of the advanced explosive cache in the tunnels, so perilously close to civilian areas, had cast a grim shadow. Lefebvre's passionate declarations of patriotism echoed uncomfortably in my mind, but Holmes, ever pragmatic, was already turning his formidable intellect to the next, most hazardous phase of our investigation. The air in our cramped hiding place still seemed to hum with the unspoken threat of those volatile chemicals. It is essential to gauge the German response to these recent escalations and to understand the nature of the man tasked with hunting our saboteur, remarked Sherlock Holmes. I confess a chill ran down my spine at his audacity. To willingly walk into the lion's den, disguised as Mynheer van der Velde, a Dutch merchant concerned with trade disruptions, seemed unparalleled daring. Yet within a day, the meeting was secured through channels I dared not question. We approached the German military headquarters, a formidable stone edifice directing Lille's occupation. Sentries' heels snapped on pavement, officers barked guttural commands, a symphony of grim efficiency. Inside, cool air carried the clatter of typewriters and the insistent buzz of a distant telegraph. We were ushered into a stark, utilitarian office possessed of a chilling order. Captain Kurt Vogel rose from a large oak desk. Perhaps 40, he was lean and erect, his pale, piercing blue eyes missing nothing. His uniform was immaculate, his fair hair severely cropped. A thin, white scar traced from his left temple to his jaw, hinting at past, less intellectual encounters. His voice was precise, with a faint, clipped accent that lent his words an air of cold authority. Mynheer van der Velde, I presume. Your concerns regarding the disruption of commerce have reached me. Pray be seated. We are, of course, equally concerned with maintaining order, Captain Kurt Vogel answered. Holmes inclined his head, his demeanor that of a slightly flustered but respectable businessman. Captain Vogel, your efficiency in granting this audience is much appreciated. These unfortunate events, they create great uncertainty for those of us attempting to conduct legitimate trade. One hears such unsettling rumors, deduced Sherlock Holmes. So began a delicate dance of words, a contest of wits across the polished desk. Holmes, with careful inquiries, sought to map German intelligence, whilst Vogel subtly probed the Dutchman's interest. The air crackled with unspoken suspicions. Each sentence was a parry, each question a thrust. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. You seem a man of keen observation, Mynheer, more so than many merchants I have encountered. You notice things. An unusual trait, perhaps, for one solely concerned with ledgers and shipments, wouldn't you agree? Remarked Captain Kurt Vogel. My heart hammered against my ribs. Vogel's tone was deceptively mild, but the implication was as sharp as a bayonet. I saw Holmes's hand, resting on the arm of his chair, remain perfectly still. Ah, Captain, these troubled times demand more than bookkeeping from a merchant. One must observe men, currents, the subtle shifts in the wind. To fail in this invites ruin. My modest successes I attribute to this unfortunate necessity for vigilance. A skill born of anxiety, I assure you, not aptitude. Sherlock Holmes noted. Vogel's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He merely nodded. The acute danger passed, deflected by Holmes's masterful blend of humility and feigned commercial pragmatism. In the ensuing conversation, Vogel, slightly less guarded, spoke of the saboteur's increasing boldness, his frustration evident as he mentioned disrupted military supply lines. He inadvertently revealed they suspected a highly organized cell, perhaps with inside knowledge of German procedures. This Nightingale, as they call her, is a particular thorn, he mused, almost to himself, his voice a low growl. A phantom, but phantoms leave traces, Mynheer, and we are very patient hunters, Captain Kurt Vogel replied. Holmes absorbed this, his expression unchanging. Soon after, the interview concluded. As we walked away from the headquarters, the heavy tramp of a passing patrol echoing in the street behind us, Holmes remained silent for a time, his brow furrowed in thought. Then, his voice crisp and decisive once more, he announced, Vogel is no fool, Watson, but he is looking for a conventional phantom. Our saboteur, I suspect, is anything but. There was a fresh bombing reported near the Old St. Pierre district last night. We shall examine the site directly. It is time to see what traces this particular phantom has indeed left behind. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. His words, cutting through the city's oppressive atmosphere, promised a new direction on a trail growing ever more complex and perilous. The web, it seemed, had many strands yet to untangle. The chill morning air of Lille bit at our faces. As we navigated the labyrinthine backstreets, Captain Vogel's piercing gaze lingered uncomfortably in my mind. Holmes, however, had already dismissed the encounter. His entire being was focused on the task ahead. From the main thoroughfares, the distant, rhythmic tramp of a German patrol echoed occasionally, a constant reminder of our precarious position. Soon we arrived at the scene of the latest sabotage. It was a railway junction box, now a twisted mass of blackened metal and splintered wood. The air hung heavy. Acrid scents of burnt oil and a faint, chemical tang filled it. From shuttered windows, a few furtive glances followed our approach. The locals were wary of any strangers in these troubled times. The silence here was profound, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the wreckage. His voice, though low, carried clearly in the stillness. A crude affair in its execution, Watson, undeniably effective, however. Note the blast's directional nature. It was intended to cause maximum disruption with minimal explosive. Sherlock Holmes responded. He moved with predatory grace amongst the debris. His keen eyes scanned every inch of the ground. I watched him, my own gaze attempting to discern what his far sharper senses would undoubtedly uncover. Several minutes of intense scrutiny passed. Then he stooped, picking up something minute with his tweezers. "Curious," he murmured, holding it up to the grey light. He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Very curious indeed," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I peered closer. It was a small, dark thread, no more than an inch in length, with a telltale loop at one end. "A piece of string, Holmes." He offered a thin smile. "More than mere string, my dear Watson. This, you see, is a surgical suture. It is of a remarkably fine quality. Catgut, if I am not mistaken. Observe the precision of the knot, had it been completed. Now I ask you, what is such an item doing here, amidst the wreckage of a railway signal box?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Before I could hazard a guess, his attention darted. Nearby, he spotted a patch of disturbed earth. He knelt again. With delicate fingers, he brushed away loose soil. A fine, black powder clung to the damp ground. It was almost invisible, save for his meticulous search. His voice took on a new intensity. "And this," he proclaimed, "is even more illuminating." He scraped a sample into a small envelope. "Coal dust, Watson. This is not, however, just any coal dust." "Coal dust?" I queried, my brow furrowed. "Is that not to be expected near a railway line?" Dr. John Watson inquired. He rose, a distinct glint shone in his eyes. "Ordinarily, yes, that would be expected. This, however, is no common variety. My preparatory studies of this region, undertaken before our departure from London, were thorough. Information, provided through certain reliable channels, detailed the local geology with considerable precision. This dust, Watson, originates from the Lesac seam, a very particular, rather uncommon type of anthracite. It is found in only one small mining concession, some 20 miles north of Lille. Its presence here, alongside a surgical suture, is therefore profoundly irregular," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Slowly the implications began to dawn on me. A specific location, a medical implement, the threads were disparate. Yet Holmes seemed to see a pattern. We prepared to depart. Just then, the heavy tread of boots approached rapidly down a nearby alley. A guttural German command cut sharply through the air. He spoke sharply, his voice a mere whisper. "This way, Watson, quickly." Into the shadows of a narrow passage we slipped. Just then, a German patrol marched past the alley's entrance. Their helmets gleamed dully, their voices were loud and harsh. We remained pressed against the cold brickwork. The sounds of their passage faded slowly. Further down our bolt hole, a door creaked open. A pair of unfriendly eyes peered out. Then the door was quickly shut again with a decisive click. The immediate danger passed. Holmes straightened his collar, his composure unruffled. "The Lesac mine," he mused, more to himself than to me. "And a surgeon's thread. Our saboteur, it seems, is a man of peculiar resources. Or perhaps these clues point to a far more complex entanglement. We must consult with Mademoiselle Dubois. Her network may well illuminate these shadows," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Thinking of Nightingale and her clandestine connections offered a sliver of hope. In the oppressive atmosphere of occupied Lille, it was much needed. The game was indeed afoot, and the stakes, I sensed, were rising with every passing hour. The chill of the Lille night seeped into my bones as Holmes, and I navigated the labyrinthine alleyways towards the rendezvous. Our recent brush with a German patrol had sharpened our senses. In the oppressive silence of the occupied city, every scrape of debris underfoot, every distant, muffled shout, seemed amplified. We finally reached the designated meeting point, a derelict warehouse, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the gloom. A gust of wind moaned through a broken pane, carrying the faint, metallic scent of rust and decay. He paused at the threshold, his silhouette framed against the faint light filtering from a distant street lamp. A suitably discreet location, Watson, though I dare say the rats have better intelligence networks than some we have encountered, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Inside, the air was heavy and still. The cavernous space echoed with our cautious footsteps on the grimy floor. Moments later, Mademoiselle Dubois emerged from near a stack of shadowy crates, a wraith in the dimness, her face pale but resolute. Her voice, though low, carried an edge of profound weariness. "Monsieur Holmes, doctor, you are punctual. It is not safe to linger," said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. His own tone was brisk, devoid of pleasantries. "Indeed, mademoiselle, time is precious. What of the internal strife you mentioned?" Sherlock Holmes responded. She nodded, her gaze darting to the warehouse's darkened corners as if fearing eavesdroppers. The distant clatter of a loose shutter punctuated the tense silence. "The resistance is fractured, monsieur. Factions exist. Lefebvre's group, driven by fierce patriotism, strikes boldly but crudely. Yet whispers speak of another element, one with chilling precision and efficiency," said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. I saw Holmes lean forward, his eyes glinting with keen interest. The very air seemed to crackle with unspoken questions. Her voice dropped further, becoming almost a whisper. "There are suspicions of collaborators, yes, but this feels different. Recent incidents causing civilian outcry don't bear Lefebvre's mark, despite his group's enthusiasm. They are too clean, too sophisticated in their cruelty," said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. "Sophisticated. Mademoiselle, does any faction in your network have medical knowledge or access to surgical supplies? Specifically, high-quality sutures?" Sherlock Holmes responded. Mademoiselle Dubois hesitated, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. The only sound for a moment was the drip of water from a leaky roof somewhere in the vast, dark space. "One group, smaller and more shadowy, is said to have a doctor or someone with such skills. They are secretive." "Why do you ask?" said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. His voice was calm, yet held a steely conviction. "Because, mademoiselle, the railway depot sabotage involved not only coal dust from a specific mine, but also a professionally applied surgical suture. An incongruous pairing for a typical partisan act, wouldn't you agree? It suggests planning and resources beyond mere zealotry," stated Sherlock Holmes. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. That innocuous suture now seemed a sinister thread in a tapestry of deceit. Mademoiselle Dubois paled visibly. "A doctor, mon dear. If true, the rot within is deeper than we feared. It could discredit us all, turn the people even against Lefebvre's men." Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, replied. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic clang echoed from the alley outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots crunching on gravel, drawing rapidly closer. Then, a guttural shout in German cut through the night. His voice was a low, urgent command. "We must depart, now. Watson, the south exit. Mademoiselle, your escape route," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. She nodded, her face a mask of grim determination, and melted back into the shadows from whence she came. Holmes and I wasted no second. We plunged towards the far end of the warehouse, seeking relative safety. Behind us, the harsh barks of German commands grew louder, a chilling promise of the dangers ahead in our pursuit of this deadly saboteur. Damp earth and stale tobacco permeated the cramped cellar. This resistance hideout reeked of unvoiced anxieties, its occupants living on a knife's edge. Our recent, hurried departure from Mademoiselle Dubois due to a sudden German patrol had not eased the tension. A single, sputtering oil lamp cast long, flickering shadows on the rough walls. It lit half a dozen grim-faced men watching Holmes and me. Their expressions were unreadable. Their leader, Marcel Lefebvre, a powerfully built man, sat opposite Holmes on a makeshift stool, his large frame seeming to fill the small space. Their hushed conversation, heard as we approached, had ceased. An expectant silence replaced it, broken only by the distant, muffled clang of a tram bell, a sound from the world above, far removed from our situation. His voice, though quiet, cut through the stillness, resonant with an underlying firmness. Monsieur Lefebvre, while your actions may be necessary, some recent events trouble me. They show a particular ruthlessness, even a theatricality that seems out of character. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Lefebvre leaned forward, his dark eyes blazing. The wooden stool creaked ominously under his weight, a sound that did not soothe my nerves. His reply was a low growl, full of suppressed passion. Troubles you, monsieur. We are at war, a war fought in shadows, where the enemy shows no quarter. Do you expect us to fight with kid gloves while our people suffer? Marcel Lefebvre replied. I expect effectiveness, certainly. But the incident at the railway depot, the one involving the signal box destroyed with such peculiar expertise, and the reports of a device utilizing what appeared to be surgical suture to bind its components, does that strike you as the typical hallmark of your group's endeavors? Sherlock Holmes responded. At this, Lefebvre slammed his fist on the rickety table. The lamp flickered wildly, and I admit my heart jumped. The other men stirred, their hands inching towards what I presumed were hidden weapons. His voice rose, sharp and indignant. The signal box, surgical suture. That was not us. My men are brave, they are resourceful, but they are not surgeons or watchmakers. We strike hard, yes, but that sounds like something else entirely. A provocation, perhaps, answered Marcel Lefebvre. Holmes, as usual in such moments, remained impassive. His gaze stayed steady on Lefebvre's agitated face, a picture of calm in the rising storm. A provocation, an interesting thought. Tell me, Monsieur Lefebvre, have your men observed anything unusual in the deployment of German patrols around the sites of these more refined acts of sabotage? Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Lefebvre paused. His immediate anger gave way to a thoughtful frown. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, a gesture of genuine perplexity. He spoke more slowly now, a note of genuine puzzlement in his tone. Now that you mention it, yes, specifically near the electrical substation that was crippled last week, the one where they claimed to find pamphlets of an unknown group. My informants reported something odd. German patrols were conspicuously light in that area for hours before the blast. Then, afterwards, they descended like locusts, rounding up anyone in the vicinity. It was the same near the canal lock 2 weeks prior. Almost as if they were expecting something, and then ensuring they made a great show of reacting to it, responded Marcel Lefebvre. A profound stillness fell upon Holmes, the familiar sign of an impending deduction. I watched, fascinated. His usually piercing eyes took on that distant, inward look I knew so well. A faint, rhythmic drip of water from a leaking pipe in the cellar depths grew loud in the silence. He rose slowly from his stool and began to pace the small, clear space, hands clasped behind his back in his typical pose of deep concentration. His voice, when he finally spoke, was devoid of its earlier challenging edge, replaced by the cool, clear tone of dawning certainty. So, a saboteur whose methods are alien to your own, whose targets, while damaging, also serve to incite maximum civilian reprisal, and German patrols that appear to facilitate these acts by their timely absence, only to reappear with theatrical efficiency to manage the aftermath. stated Sherlock Holmes. He stopped pacing as suddenly as he had begun and faced Lefebvre. His expression was decidedly grim. Monsieur Lefebvre, your denial regarding the suture, coupled with this intelligence on German movements, illuminates a rather sinister possibility. We are not merely dealing with a saboteur of unusual skill or ruthlessness. It suggests a meticulously crafted deception, a false flag designed to discredit the true resistance, to sow discord, and perhaps to justify even harsher measures by the occupying forces. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The weight of Holmes's words settled upon us, heavy in the damp, oppressive cellar air. Lefebvre stared at my friend, his earlier bluster gone, replaced by dawning horror. The crucible of doubt had yielded a terrible, chilling clarity, perhaps as Holmes foresaw. If Holmes was correct, and I rarely doubted him when he spoke with such certainty, the true enemy was not just the German soldier. It was a far more insidious manipulator, working from the shadows of the occupation. This adversary possessed not only the skills for such precise destruction, but also the means to coordinate with German movements. The pressing question for Holmes and me was, who was this phantom? And more critically, how could we expose them in this perilous environment? The chill of the Lille evening seeped into my bones, rivaled only by the gnawing uncertainty of our perilous investigation. Holmes, however, seemed impervious. His focus had been absolute since encountering Lefebvre, and his suspicion of German deception had solidified. He awaited a further sign. It came as a hastily scrawled note from a nervous lad who quickly vanished. The brief message appointed a meeting at the derelict church of St. Crispin at the 11th hour. Sanctuary or a trap, Watson? Holmes mused, yet he decided to attend without hesitation. The church stood skeletal against the bruised twilight, its shattered windows allowing the wind to sigh through its hollow shell. Our footsteps echoed on the stone floor as we entered. The air was thick with decay and damp stone. A candle near the crumbling altar cast long, dancing shadows. From the deeper gloom of a transept, Dr. Antoine Moreau emerged, his face etched with profound exhaustion. "Monsieur, the Dutchman, you came." I wasn't certain," replied Dr. Antoine Moreau. "A man of science seeking consultation at this hour, in this place, doctor, implies urgency." "Mademoiselle Dubois spoke of your integrity," declared Sherlock Holmes. At the mention of Nightingale, a flicker of relief or deeper despair crossed Moreau's face. He wrung his hands, his gaze darting to the windowless gaps as if fearing unseen observers. "Integrity. There is little of that left to me, monsieur. I am utterly compromised," replied Dr. Antoine Moreau. "Compromised by circumstance or choice, doctor. A vital distinction. I saw the suture work at the railway depot, a precise surgeon's knot. Not easily forged, nor common among saboteurs. Captain Vogel, I presume, found your skills adaptable," deduced Sherlock Holmes. Moreau started, his composure shattering. He sank onto a broken pew, head in his hands. His ragged breathing filled the silence of the ruined church. Vogel, he has my family. My wife, daughter, hostages for my cooperation. He forced me. The operations were his design, to seem like resistance work, but more brutal, indiscriminate, to turn the populace against them. That suture, yes, it was mine. A detail he insisted on, a mark of authenticity. He wanted to frame Lefebvre, discredit all who fight back, answered Dr. Antoine Moreau. Holmes listened, his expression unreadable in the dim light, yet I sensed profound understanding in his stillness. Moreau's confession tumbled out, a torrent of guilt, fear, and a desperate need to unburden his conscience. He recounted the threats, the coercion to tend German wounded, and finally, his forced complicity in acts that condemned his own countrymen. And the unusual German patrols, doctor, those Lefebvre noted, which conveniently missed these resistance attacks, yet were positioned to witness the aftermath and control the narrative, remarked Sherlock Holmes. "All part of it. Vogel orchestrated everything. He is a devil in man's skin. I came to you because I can bear it no longer. Innocence will hang for what I enabled, remarked Dr. Anton Morrow. Indeed, Lefebvre's denial of that act with your testimony completes the picture. Vogel plays a double game, Doctor. It's time to disrupt it. Your harrowing confession provides our leverage, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes rose, his silhouette tall and resolute against the altar candle's faint light. The wind seemed to die down, as if holding its breath. There is a path to atonement, Dr. Morrow, though perilous. Captain Vogel fancies himself a puppet master. It's time to show him the strings are in other hands. We shall arrange a meeting, you and I, with this captain. He will learn the cost of his deceptions. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Desperate hope flickered in Morrow's eyes. The cold air of the derelict church now carried a charge of impending confrontation. Our adversary's intricate web was about to be torn. The abandoned factory loomed before us on Lille's outskirts, a skeletal silhouette against the twilight. A chill wind whistled through shattered windows, carrying scents of damp earth and decay, a mournful symphony that heightened my unease. Holmes finally broke the silence, his voice low and resonant in the gloom. "The message was explicit, Watson," declared Sherlock Holmes. Holmes murmured. "Captain Vogel is a man who appreciates punctuality and directness. He will not keep us waiting long," Sherlock Holmes said. He stood near a broken loading bay, peering into the gathering dark. Our single, sputtering oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the grimy walls. My hand often sought the reassurance of my service revolver. Dr. Morrow's signed testimony, a damning account of coercion, lay secured in Holmes's pocket, a fragile shield against German military might. As Holmes predicted, a grating shriek of metal soon announced an arrival. The far factory door was thrust inward, and several figures appeared against the fading light. One, taller and more imposing, strode forward. A crisp, authoritative voice, its German accent precise, cut the air. "Herr Muller, I presume. You requested this clandestine audience. I trust it is of significance," Captain Kurt Vogel answered. Holmes turned slowly, lamplight catching his sharp features, still disguised as the unassuming Dutchman. Captain Kurt Vogel was every inch the ruthless intelligence officer Morrow had described, lean, hard-eyed, with an air of predatory stillness. "Indeed, Captain Vogel, of the utmost significance, I assure you. It concerns the recent, shall we say, enthusiastic activities of your saboteur," Sherlock Holmes responded. A faint smile touched Vogel's lips. "Ah, the elusive phantom. You have information. The German authorities offer a substantial reward for such," responded Captain Kurt Vogel. "My interest is not in rewards, Captain, but in truth. For instance, the peculiar type of surgical suture found at the scene of the attack on the depot. A chromic catgut, German military issue, is it not? And tied with a surgeon's knot, yet most crudely applied, as if for show," Sherlock Holmes noted. Vogel's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling loose corrugated iron with a sudden clang. Vogel replied smoothly. "A desperate man might use any material to hand." "Your point, Herr Muller," said Captain Kurt Vogel. "My point, Captain, is that the saboteur you hunt so diligently is a fabrication. A spectre conjured by your own intelligence services to discredit the true resistance and to justify certain measures," Sherlock Holmes said. Holmes paused. When he continued, his voice had taken on a sharper, familiar timbre that sent a shiver down my spine. "Perhaps you would find my conclusions more compelling if you knew with whom you were truly dealing. The alias of Muller has served its purpose," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He straightened to his full height. Even in the dim light, the transformation was remarkable. The diffident Dutchman vanished, replaced by the keen, incisive presence I knew so well. "My name is Sherlock Holmes," Sherlock Holmes said. He produced papers from his coat. And this is the sworn statement of Dr. Antoine Moreau, detailing his forced participation in your false flag operation, explained Sherlock Holmes. A stunned silence descended, broken only by the rhythmic tramp of distant marching boots, suddenly growing louder, closer. Vogel's face, illuminated by the flickering lamp, was a mask of cold fury, the veneer of civility shattered. Vogel's voice was a low snarl. Holmes, so the famous English meddler graces us with his presence. An impressive deduction. A pity you will not live to see it published, answered Captain Kurt Vogel. Vogel raised his hand. Sharp metallic clicks echoed as his men, surrounding the doorway and advancing into the factory, raised their rifles. The air grew taut with menace. We were trapped, the hunter now the hunted. Holmes, however, remained unnervingly calm, his eyes fixed on Vogel. The game is far from over, Captain. Check, perhaps, but not yet checkmate, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Heavy thuds of boots on the concrete floor surrounded us, the lamplight glinting on polished gun barrels, a terrifying promise. Our carefully laid trap had sprung, but it seemed we too were caught within its jaws. In the wake of Captain Vogel's downfall, a ringing silence engulfed us, quickly giving way to the chilling realization of our precarious position. Though the German intelligence officer's scheme lay exposed, Lille itself had become a hornet's nest. Distant shouts and the clatter of boots on cobblestones, more frequent now, signaled a city stirred to fury. Holmes, however, wasted no time on retrospection. His lean form was a silhouette against the grimy window of our temporary sanctuary, the faint glow from outside outlining his sharp profile as his mind raced several moves ahead. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, a contrast to the distant, unsettling sounds of the city reawakening. A nervous murmur punctuated by the occasional sharp command echoing in the streets. Mademoiselle Dubois, Dr. Moreau must be moved at once. His testimony is invaluable, but his life is now in extreme peril. Others, too, who aided us, must be spirited away before the dragnet tightens, Sherlock Holmes noted. Mademoiselle Dubois, her face pale but resolute in the dim light filtering from a sputtering gas lamp, its gentle hiss a counterpoint to the tension, nodded. The strain of the past days was evident, yet her courage shone through. Her voice, though hushed, carried unwavering conviction, each word clear despite the low volume. It is arranged, Monsieur Holmes. Our people move swiftly. Moreau and the others you named are being hidden anew. But the evidence, Moreau's testimony, your secured documents must reach Allied command, said Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale. She gestured towards a carefully wrapped parcel on the rough wooden table. The rustle of the oilcloth wrapping was a small, sharp sound in the otherwise quiet room. The very air around it seemed charged with significance. There is a route, she continued, her gaze meeting Holmes's, her voice dropping even lower, as if the walls themselves might listen. One we use only in the direst need. It is perilous, a chain of trusted hands stretching towards the coast. Each link is a life risked. The risk is justified by the prize, Mademoiselle, Holmes affirmed, his tone firm. That package contains the truth that can discredit a monstrous German operation and save countless lives. It must go tonight, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. A heavy silence fell, thick and expectant. It was broken only by the distant, rhythmic tramp of a German patrol passing the end of the alley, their boots striking sparks from the cobblestones, a metallic scrape and click that faded slowly. Before long, we found ourselves descending into a damp cellar. The air grew thick with the smell of earth and mildew, and the only sound was the drip of water somewhere in the darkness. We were awaiting Marcel Lefebvre. He arrived like a minor storm, his footsteps thundering heavily on the wooden stairs, each tread echoing in the confined space. His presence seemed to suck the remaining air from the cellar. His voice, when it came, was a gravelly rasp, like stones grinding together, full of suspicion. So, the great detective and Nightingale. You have exposed a German plot, I hear. Does this change anything? The fight continues, by any means necessary, replied Marcel Lefebvre. Holmes regarded him coolly, his own voice a calm counterpoint to Lefebvre's harsh tones. It changes how the fight must be perceived, Monsieur Lefebvre. Your indiscriminate methods nearly played into their hands. True resistance requires precision, not merely passion. The evidence now en route will strike a blow far greater than a dozen ill-conceived bombings that alienate the populace and serve only to create more noise than impact. Sherlock Holmes noted. Lefebvre scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound that echoed briefly in the small space. Words, paper, the Boche understand only force. The crack of a rifle, the roar of an explosion, answered Marcel Lefebvre. Nightingale's voice cut in, sharp and clear as a well-struck bell. And what of the innocents caught in your force, Marcel? The cries of those caught in the crossfire. This evidence proves the enemy sought to make us monsters. We must prove them wrong, not become what they paint us to be. Mademoiselle Yvette Dubois, Nightingale, said. Lefebvre stared from one to the other, his heavy breathing the only sound for a long moment. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, he gave a curt nod, a grudging acceptance perhaps. Without another word, he turned, his boots once again pounding on the wooden steps as he vanished back up the stairs. The sound of a door slamming shut above punctuated his departure. His exit was as abrupt as his arrival, and the air in the cellar seemed to clear a little, the oppressive tension easing with the fading echo of his footsteps. Our escape from Lille unfolded, in tense silence. We crept through shadowed back streets and across desolate wasteland at the city's edge. A loose shutter's creak, a distant shout, each sound jolted my nerves. Holmes, with Nightingale as our guide, moved with silent purpose. At one point, near a proposed crossing, he paused, holding up a hand. He was listening intently, not to any specific sound, but rather to the absence of one. "No, mademoiselle," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, his breath misting in the chill night air. "Not this way. The usual sentry post on Rue Gambetta is quiet, too quiet. I don't hear the customary cough, the shuffle of feet. An unscheduled silence often precedes a trap. We will detour via the old tanneries. The stench alone should deter casual patrols, and the gurgle of the river La Deule nearby will mask our passage," replied Sherlock Holmes. His reasoning, as ever, proved sound. We slipped through the sleeping city like wraiths. The only sounds were the sighing of the wind in the narrow alleys and the distant, mournful chime of a forgotten church bell marking the late hour. The oppressive atmosphere of occupation pressed down on us, a palpable weight, until at last the open countryside lay before us, the chirping of crickets a welcome, natural sound. It was only much later, after a perilous journey back towards Allied lines, a journey filled with close calls and the constant strain of listening for danger, that we received confirmation. A coded message, brief and crackling over a clandestine wireless. Nightingale's perilous chain had held. The evidence, the price of so much courage, had reached its destination. The return to London, though swift, felt as if crossing a vast chasm from one world to another. The grim realities of occupied Lille, its shadowed alleys and the constant whisper of fear, slowly receded, replaced by the familiar, bustling cadence of our own capital. Yet the echoes of that perilous venture lingered, not least in the somber lines etched upon my companion's face. Our first duty lay at the War Office, a grey, imposing edifice that seemed to hum with the unseen machinery of conflict. Major Alistair Finch received us in an office surprisingly sparse for a man of his responsibilities. A large map of the Western Front dominated one wall, its surface pricked with countless pins. The air was thick with the scent of pipe tobacco and official documents. The rhythmic tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the corridor was the only sound for a moment as he regarded us, his gaze keen. His voice was firm. with an underlying note of fatigue as he spoke. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, your journey, I understand, was eventful," said Major Alistair Finch. "The package from Mademoiselle Dubois arrived. Its contents have proven invaluable, utterly invaluable," Major Alistair Finch answered. Holmes replied, his tone devoid of triumph. "The truth, Major, often carries its own undeniable weight," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He paused briefly. Captain Vogel's machinations were designed to fracture, to breed mistrust. "The evidence, I trust, has cauterized that particular wound," deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Indeed, it has shifted perspectives significantly, confirmed suspicions we held, but could not substantiate. You have done the Crown a singular service, gentlemen, operating far outside your usual sphere," answered Major Alistair Finch. He paused, tapping a pen against his blotter, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "A dangerous sphere," answered Major Alistair Finch. Later that evening, ensconced once more in the familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings, the rain lashing against the window panes provided a mournful counterpoint to the crackling fire. Holmes sat opposite me, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the dancing flames. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken thoughts. I ventured, "It was a damnable business, Holmes. Young Moreau, caught between his conscience and the jackboot of occupation. And Lefevre, a patriot perhaps, but at what cost?" responded Dr. John Watson. He nodded slowly, his voice low and reflective. "War, Watson, is a crucible that burns away pretense, revealing the raw material of a man's soul," explained Sherlock Holmes. "Moreau chose a perilous path of quiet defiance, his medical skill a shield for others. Lefevre, consumed by righteous fury, risked becoming the very thing he fought against," remarked Sherlock Holmes. "The line between savior and saboteur can become perilously thin under such pressures," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He rose and paced before the hearth, the floorboards creaking softly beneath his tread. His voice regained some of its familiar analytic edge as he continued. "Consider Vogel. His entire strategy was predicated on exploiting that very ambiguity," explained Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused in his pacing. "The planted evidence, the carefully orchestrated civilian casualties, all designed to paint the resistance with a brutal, indiscriminate brush, thereby alienating the populace and justifying harsher reprisals." He turned to face me. "A cunning mind, undoubtedly, but one ultimately undone by the courage of a few and the irrefutable logic of truth," Sherlock Holmes noted. It was then that Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a small, sealed envelope upon a silver tray. The sight of it, so ordinary in our extraordinary lives, seemed to momentarily break the somber spell. Holmes took it, his eyes narrowing slightly as he examined the rather plain, foreign stamp. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his expression as he slit the envelope open. "Ah," replied Sherlock Holmes. He murmured, then his eyes scanned the contents, a single sheet of thin paper covered in a compact, coded script. After a few moments of intense concentration, during which the only sounds were the hiss of the gaslight and the drumming rain, he looked up. A faint smile touched his lips. He announced quietly, "From our Nightingale," a simple message of gratitude and an assurance that the network, though battered, endures, declared Sherlock Holmes. "She mentions that the echoes of our work in Lille are already fostering a more unified, and perhaps more discerning, resistance." He passed the decoded message to me, its brevity speaking volumes. The courage of Mademoiselle Dubois, a beacon in that darkened city, was truly remarkable. Holmes returned to his vigil by the fire, the paper resting on his knee. His voice, when he next spoke, was softer, tinged with a profound melancholy I had rarely heard. "This war, Watson, extracts a terrible price, not merely in lives lost on the battlefield, but in the compromises forced upon good people, the erosion of certainties. We have seen loyalty twisted, sacrifice demanded in the shadows, and heroism cloaked in actions that, in peacetime, would be condemned. Sherlock Holmes responded, "The echoes of Lille will resonate for a long time, a stark reminder of the human spirit's resilience and its capacity for both darkness and light when tested to its limits," explained Sherlock Holmes. He fell silent then, lost in his own profound contemplations. Outside, the London fog began to swirl, muffling the sounds of the city, and I knew that this adventure, more than many others, had left an indelible mark upon the mind and soul of Sherlock Holmes. The great game continued, but its pieces and its players were forever changed by the grim realities of a world at war.